Good morning, good evening to each of you. Welcome here, and I'm really looking forward to what God has for us here through the brothers here tonight. I was thinking, reading the Sword and Trumpet this afternoon. I don't know if any of you have read the article talking about the magic church door. Well, I guess didn't call it the magic church door, but the church door that changes everything. Did it change something in you when you came in? Were you having a rough start on the way here to church, and you came in here and now you're all smiles and all polite and everything? I was thinking the church door should also, that's the negative way, but the church door should also be a place that change happens for when we go out. And that's what we want to do here. That's why we're meeting here tonight, is so that we can look at things, and that's why we meet each time. So we can look at ourselves, and as we go out the door, that change happens, and we're able to affect the world around us. I'm just going to read a couple verses here in Colossians 3. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever you do, do heartily as unto the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. I was thinking with these topics that we have, sometimes throughout our lives, we wonder what God would have for us, what he wants us to do, how we should live. And we often dream of making a big impact in the world, maybe having a business where we can impact many people, have a bunch of employees, and impact a lot of people's lives. Maybe go in the mission field and where we can impact people's lives. But what about just being faithful where you're at? God has called us to be faithful, and that's the verse 23 there. We are to do what we do heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men, and God calls us to faithful service. Our first topic tonight will be Kingdom Employees by Rutt, and then the second one will be Serving Others in the Church by Brendan Miller. And then after Brendan is finished, Curtis will lead a song, and then Conrad will close and give opportunity for any testimonies if you have any. Let's pray before Curt begins. God, we thank you for your goodness and for your mercy in our lives. We thank you for salvation through Jesus. We thank you that you have a call on each one of our lives, and that you would have each one of us to be faithful in what you have called us to do. I pray that we could be faithful and serve others as we serve you. Just pray that you be with Curt and Brendan as they share here tonight. Pray that you would open our hearts for what you have for us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, good evening. I was asked to speak on a topic of kingdom employees, and I think this came out of reach when I told Gerald that they had a topic there, a main topic had everybody involved in it, whatever you want to call that, for kingdom employers. And I said, well, most of your people in there are employees. You ought to have a topic on kingdom employees, and I think Chet overheard that. And so here I am. I come to you with fear and trembling as I think about that, because I haven't always been the model employee. I've been an employee since 1988, is when I first started as an employee, and I've never had the desire to be an employer. I will be an employee, and as long as I'm able, I will be an employee. I don't have a desire to be an employer. My employer treats me good. My bills are paid. I enjoy what I do. So why would I change? A few years ago, I did go through a midlife crisis, but that put me in a tailspin. That's a whole other topic that we're not going to talk about tonight. As I look back over the years, I realize I have a list of failures and a trail of debris. I've wrecked several company trucks. I've not always been kind to my fellow employees. I hung one employee up by a chain hoist by his leg. I helped roll a toolbox for another employee as a welcome back gift. We rolled his toolbox, his tools were just a mess. I made quite a few careless moves over the years. I cost my employer thousands of dollars. I had an engine lock up after rebuilding it because I was in a hurry and I didn't line up the teeth properly on the oil pump. And so after running the engine for about 10 hours, the shaft on the oil pump was wobbling because I had bent it, and it fell off and the engine locked up. Cost my employer thousands of dollars. So I haven't always been on the list of the employee of the month, for the employee of the month. And so tonight, I want to think a little bit about a kingdom employee. Recently, my employer asked me to help set the culture for our location there in Somerset. And I realized if I'm going to do that, it's going to take a little bit of forethought. It's not something that just happens. And as I was thinking about that culture, I think that I want it to be a God-honoring culture. So as I think about God-honoring, I had to ask myself, what is that? And what does that look like? And I feel that's Christ-like. And I know that's a really broad term, and so we're going to try to pull that together here tonight to know what is it, how can we be Christ-like as an employee? I went to Google search engine, and well, I shouldn't say Google search engine. I just did a search in maybe Strong's Concordance to see how many times employee is used in the New King James Version, and it is not used a single time. But I found that workman is used, a variation of workman is used 22 times, and a variation of servant is used 971 times. And I think a workman and servant probably describes an employee. So if you're an employee, you're a servant to your employer, and you're a workman or a workwoman. You do a work. So today, instead of using the word servant or slave, we use the term employee. And I really don't think I'm a slave to my employer. I don't feel that way, and I hope you don't either. Those of you that are employees, that you feel like you're a slave to your employer. So let's think a little bit about Jesus. So if it's Christ-like, let's look at Jesus at 12 years of age in Luke chapter 2, verse 49. Jesus realized that he had a work to do. And I'm going to read those verses. See, I think Chet said 25 minutes, and I didn't look to see when I started, but I'm usually pretty good at getting it done, so we'll see if I can do it tonight. So Luke chapter 2. So Jesus is 12 years old. We see him sitting at the feet of the doctors in the temple. His mother is really frustrated because she just spent quite a bit of time looking for him. And so I'm going to read verses 49 through 52. So his mother catches up with him, and he says unto them, verse 49, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? And they understood not that saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them, and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So one of the things he realized at 12 years of age is that he had a work to do. God had a plan for him. God had work for him. And he told his mother, didn't you realize I'm about my Father's business? And so God has work for us. We have work. It's a creation principle. And God has worked for us. And one of the things that happened is in Jesus' work is he grew. There in verse 52 says he grew in wisdom, he increased in wisdom and stature and favor among men. So as employees, do we grow in understanding of our job, and do our fellow employees continue to like us more? You know, when I hung that young man up by the hoist, I can tell you I had a reason for that, but he did not appreciate Curt. I was not growing in favor with him. It was not Christ-like. So we need to be teachable as employees. It's one of the things that is a kingdom employee. The creation principle. God designed us to work. Our self-esteem and attitude are better when we accomplish something. There's a feeling of contentment and satisfaction when the work is done. It feels good to have the research paper complete. It feels good to have the canning shelves full. It feels good to put brakes in a Magnum in a day. And it feels good to put the finishing touches on a building project. At the end of the day, it's like, we did it, and we feel good about ourselves. We might be tired, but it feels good. We're created to work. Genesis 2:15, this is ESV. The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. So there, Adam had a job. He was to work, he was to keep that garden. And God has given us abilities. I believe that when we use that God-given ability, work is no longer work. It's probably not work. We have bad days, but I think we enjoy what we do. I'd come to realize that as I sat with a manager one day. We get employee reviews yearly, and one of my managers is probably, I don't know, it's probably 15 years ago or better, told me that he felt that I was gifted as a mechanic. He felt like God had gifted me with a mechanical ability. And he said, I don't know what your dreams and hopes are, but I recommend that you continue with your mechanical ability, because God has blessed you with that. And I believe that God does bless us with abilities, gifts and abilities to work with our hands, and maybe to work through hard problems, or and when we use those gifts, we honor God. Exodus, just a few verses to back up that. Exodus chapter 35. So God is, the Israelites are at a place where they're building the temple, or the tabernacle. And God gave men abilities, and he gave men the abilities to teach. So they gave them the abilities to work with wood and gold and silver and embroidery, weaving, and he also gave them the ability to teach it to others. And so we see that in Exodus 35. I'm going to read a few verses there. Verse 30 says, And Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord hath called by name. Oh yeah, I forgot. I'm going to butcher these names. I'm sorry. He called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he hath filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all manner of workmanship. I wonder what for abilities that man had. All manner of workmanship God gifted him to be able to do it. And to devise curious works in work in gold and in silver and in brass and in the cutting of stone, to set them, and in carving of wood, and to make any manner of cunning work that he might put, and he hath put in his heart, that he may teach both he and Aboliab, the son of Ishmach, and of the tribe of Dan. So not only was this man gifted, but he was able to teach it. And so God blessed us, gave us abilities. And some abilities he gifted us, and some of them we can learn. So we, as employees, will need to continue to learn our job, or continue to learn and grow as we work. So God has given some instruction to us then. So I believe we have work, and I think we're all involved in some kind of work. And some of us are employers, some of us are employees, but God has given but tonight I'm looking at employees. So God has given us some definite instruction on how to be an employee. And I'm going to look at, use the verses that Chet read and pull some points out of that and talk about a few things in there. So Colossians 3:23 says, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God, and whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. Now, we're going to cover these verses next week in Sunday school, I believe. And I think the key to these verses, you got to go back to today's Sunday school lessons, verses 1 and 2, and it says, seek those things that are above and set your affections on things that are above. And for us to be kingdom employees and to fulfill verse 22 and 23, I think first our affections, our seeking and affections have to be at the right place. So our desire should be to be building the kingdom of God. So I don't necessarily have these in order of what I saw here in these two verses, but the first one I come out of is work diligently. So do your work heartily. Give it your all. I was kind of fascinated by some research that I found about us Americans. We really do struggle with working heartily, and I don't think we're exempt from this. The ideal work hours for human production is 3 to 4 hours a day. So research says that's the ideal amount of work you get out of an employee, 3 to 4 hours. And I was like, wow, maybe I overestimate my contribution to my employer. But the average American worker only gives his employer about 2 to 3 hours a day. Maximum 6. And if you do mental work, so I'm assuming that means you're doing something behind a computer, you're really only productive 2 to 3 hours a day. And I was like, oh my, I hope we can do better than that. I think one of the things that I'd make a mistake of, so thinking about that then, I was like, I think I probably, as I need to consider my work habits, maybe I overestimate my contribution to my employer. Here's studies that prove that the American worker only really works about 2 to 3 hours a day. How well do we do? Ecclesiastes 9, chapter 9, verse 10 says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. Now is the time to do a good job. Now is the time to do your job well. So do it diligently. The second thing I drew out of these verses is to be honest and ethical. Obey your master. God is asking us to obey our master, to obey our employer. It's a God-ordained role, and we're actually doing it to serve the Lord, not necessarily to serve our employer. Our goal is to serve the Lord. Ephesians 5:6 says, be obedient, and this is my words. But obey your employer, even as you would Christ. 1 Timothy 6:1 says, honor employers and please them, so God is not blasphemed. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. How you treat your employer affects God's reputation. 2 Peter 2:18, be obedient even when they don't deserve it. We're not about to get into what employers do that we would feel we shouldn't deserve to serve them, but we are to obey our employer even if they don't deserve it. So God has ordained our role as employees, and we'll answer to him for our hard work or our clock watching. Be honest with customers, honest in billing, and honest in our time cards. Ephesians 4:28 says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands, that which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. So kind of a side note here for us. Part of working is so that we have something to give. It's not just about us. God shares a story with us about a dishonest servant or dishonest employee. 2 Timothy Kings, I'll get it yet. 2 Kings 5, verses 20 through 22. Elisha's servant, Naaman came to Elisha and offered him all kinds of goods to be healed. And Elisha did not take any of it. And his servant, Gehazi, went after Naaman and said, hey, I think my master has changed his mind. And so Naaman loaded him up with goods. And he took him back to his place. When he came back to Elisha asked him, what happened there? And he lied about it. He lied to Naaman, he lied to his employer. And because of it, he got the leprosy that Naaman had. And that's God's opinion of dishonest employees. It's not appreciated. It's not what God has intended. Be honest in the workplace. A third thing is avoid eye service. If you get more done in a day when your boss is on the job with you, you are guilty of eye service. You work harder when he's around. Colossians 3:23 says, we are working for the Lord and will answer to God for our work ethic. Once again, I'm paraphrasing that. God is asking us to give our job our best effort, even when the boss is missing. An honest day's work for an honest day's wage. We're asked to know the job and to do it to the best of our ability. A little side note here for employers. I was intrigued with the book, If Anyone Would Follow Me, page 72, where it talks about the Russian Mennonites and how those farmers paid their seasonal staff $30 to $45 a season. And that was considered normal pay. Yet their take-home pay was $1,500 to $4,000 a year. And they actually the neighbors were really frustrated with them. It caused resentment in their communities for the pay difference. And I encourage you employers to not look at an employee when you're determining wages, but look at the job that they're doing. It'll also make your employee want to work harder. An employer, as employees, back to employees again, an employer expects the employee to know his job and asks you to give it the best of your ability, and that's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable at all. The fourth thing I got out of these verses is that we give our employer peace and rest. If you do your job well, your employer can rest easy, and it gives them a little peace in life. And Proverbs 25:13 says, as the cold of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to him that sendeth him, for he refresheth the soul of his master. A good employee gives rest. Whoso keepeth the fig tree shall eat the fruit thereof, so he that waiteth on his master shall be honored. The fifth thing I got out of this Colossians 3 there is to be a good witness. And a witness for God, a witness for Jesus. Jesus is our Savior, our King, and how well do I represent him to those I work with? Not all of us work with customers, but a lot of us do. But some of us, witnessing is not only to customers, it is also to our fellow employees. Leviticus 19:33 and 34, and again I'm going to paraphrase here, provide a safe workplace, be approachable, have fun, and care for your fellow employees, fellow workers. If you're involved in back-breaking work, take turns with your fellow employees on the job. When you take lunch breaks, find out what's going on in your fellow employees' lives. At our shop there, we often have, I say often, usually about once a month, we'll have an impromptu shop meeting after 5 o'clock. And usually we discuss what's going on in our lives. Two of my fellow employees have sons that are less than a year old. And they talk about the challenges and the excitement of raising their boys, and it's good. It's good to be honest with them about what's going on in life. It's a big part of building relationships and making it a safe workplace. Be part of those discussions. Thinking about a safe workplace, mental health is getting to be a real issue in our workplaces. U.S. Department of Human Health Services reports that 76% of U.S. workers are struggling with mental health. That's a high number. 84% say that their workplace conditions have contributed to their mental health challenge. And these things are not only employers' responsibilities, they're employees. As we work beside people, it's our responsibility. 81% are looking for workplaces that support mental health. Those are high numbers. So how well do I do as an employee? And there's many things in a workplace that affect mental health, and only a few of them that an employee can actually to help with. And I'll just read the list, and not all of them are inside our power. But in the workplace and mental health, thinking about mental health. Underuse of skills or being underskilled for work can provide mental stress. Excessive workloads or work pace, understaffing, and that's not something an employee can really handle or take care of. Long or unsociable or inflexible hours, lack of control over job design or workload, organizational culture that enables negative behaviors. And the negative behaviors is something us employees can take care of. How well do we treat our fellow workers, our fellow employees? Limited support from colleagues, violence, harassment or bullying, discrimination, unclear job roles, and unsafe or poor physical working conditions. And I think that's something as an employee we can contribute, especially in a shop. I can contribute to unsafe conditions, whether I clean up my floors, I got oil, make a mess on the floor. Do I clean it up or do I leave it there and somebody else has to deal with it? I was thinking about a story of mental health or working with a man. So I was a young man. I worked beside a middle-aged guy. I'm just going to call him Pete. Pete had a raging temper. I was actually scared of him. And I found it best to start the day out by treading softly around him until I had an idea of how Pete was feeling. The simplest things would send Pete into a rage. And one day he broke a punch, and that punch came flying past me and hit the wall there beside me. And I got out from underneath the tractor, whatever I was working on, and to get something. I picked his punch up and put it on my toolbox because that punch had a lifetime warranty, and I knew Pete was going to come back to get it. Didn't say anything to him because he wasn't in a good mood. So kept on my job. Later in the day, I saw Pete was over there poking around my workbench. So I told him, I said, "Your punch is on my toolbox." And he muttered something and walked away, and I'm assuming it was a thank you. But don't really know. He got his punch replaced. But he was a man that would just fly into a rage, and I treaded softly around him. Let's not be Pete. And if we are Pete, let's be honest about that. We need to grow in knowledge of that. I could have laughed about Pete and his anger and his foolishness of throwing a punch. And thankfully that day I was mature enough to just pick it up and put it on my toolbox. In Luke 5, Jesus went on in his ministry, and his teaching and his healing brought people from far and wide. They wanted to rub shoulders with Jesus. And I think our families and our fellow workers could probably tell us the most about who we are, and do they want to rub shoulders with us?
You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. That's Galatians 5:13. My initial instinct when I was asked to have this topic was to focus on specific ways that we can serve others in the church. And maybe that's what they intended for me to talk about. I don't know, and I am going to talk about that some. But as I started to look into this, some of the initial questions that came into my mind were, what exactly do we mean by the church? If we talk about serving others in the church, what do we mean by the church? What do we mean by the others? Who are the others? And what does it mean to serve them? And I started to realize that there are sort of these levels when it comes to thinking about the church. And I'll explain a little bit more what I'm talking about by that, but I think that these levels are integral and connected. So more on that later. I want to get into some specific practical things. But first, I want to explore the context of serving others in the church and talk about the what and the why before talking about the how. I also want to look at some possible pitfalls that we can run into with serving others, maybe some difficulties, and how we can help to avoid or minimize those. And I should maybe mention that it feels like this is a little bit of a 30,000-foot overview in some ways. As I was studying for this, I kept finding these things that I was like, oh yeah, I could talk about that little aspect of it for 15 minutes, but I have 25 minutes here. And I think it's actually okay. I think as Anabaptists, we do pretty good at getting very practical and granular sometimes. And so I want to give a little bit more of the big picture and just kind of dip down in a few different areas. So first of all, what is the church and what are these levels that I'm talking about? I'm using the word levels because I couldn't think of a better one. So if you have an idea for what word I'm looking for afterwards, let me know. But I think there are three different ways to look at service in the church. First of all, we can think about Trauger Church, our intimate local body of believers who are serving God right here in Trauger. And that's probably what we first think about when we think about serving others in the church. We're thinking about each other. How are we serving our fellow brothers and sisters? But there's also the broader church. So we have the fellow Christians in this area, people of different denominations who are also serving God in their own little churches. We also have the broader Anabaptist church. We're also working alongside them. But then there's also the universal church, and that is the bride of Christ working in the world, trying to further God's kingdom. So those are the three different levels that was kind of wrestling with here and thinking, how do those all work together? There's sort of different aspects of it, and yet I think that we can't just have one without any of the others. It's all tied together. And I think that service is more meaningful and works better and is more purposeful and more worthwhile when it's done in the context of all three of those levels, the context of our church here, the broader church, and then what God's plan is for his bride. So service in the local church enables us to serve as the bride of Christ in a broken world. Service right here in Trauger Church provides structure and support that allows the church here and the broader church to work towards the plans that God has for the world. It serves as a springboard that helps launch our work, your work, my work, and fulfill what God wants us to do. I think there can be this idea that as Anabaptists, we can get a little bit inward focused, maybe in our appeal to and our interactions with the world. For example, some of my friends growing up who are no longer Anabaptist, one of their big problems with Anabaptists is they felt like we weren't appealing enough maybe to the world, that we're too inwardly focused. We have our own little tight-knit communities, and it doesn't allow space for us to serve well to those around us. And I don't agree with them. I think we can have tendencies that way, and I think it's something we need to watch out for. But I think there's very strong value in having a strong brotherhood because it enables us to then reach other people. We just need to make sure that it doesn't stay here with the brotherhood. Serving the broader church now, so going on to that second level, helps take the focus off of us and our own little community and what's happening to us. And it helps us see that we are small parts of a vast community of believers who are all working together toward a common goal. And then finally, for the third level, I think it's more about serving those outside of the church. We are called to be like Christ and bring his message of hope to the lost. And we see that in the Great Commission, what God called us to, and we see that in the way that Jesus lived his life. So I think what I'm trying to say, and as I tried to narrow these things down, is that we do a disservice to just narrow it down to Trauger Mennonite Church, or to just talk about the broader church. I think we need all of those together. So now I've looked a little bit at the what and the why. I'd like to look at the how. So how do we successfully serve others in the church, and what exactly does that look like? I want to look at a few biblical examples. So if we're thinking here on the Trauger level, you can think of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. Those were his close, intimate friends, his close community, his Trauger Mennonite church, and he washed their feet. That was an act of service to them. On a broader church level, we have a great example that we looked at in Sunday school not too long ago. You can turn there if you'd like. It's 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 5. And I'm going to read that here. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves, first of all, to the Lord, and then, by the will of God, also to us. It's an example of service, not just to the local church, but to the broader church community, serving another fellow church. And then finally, thinking about the universal church, the bride of Christ, we have Jesus and the woman at the well, serving someone who is not a part of his community, serving someone who was lost. We also have the example of the Good Samaritan. Again, somebody who's not a part of his community, and yet he found a need, saw a need, and was looking to help that person. And of course, in service, the great example that we have is Jesus. So what are some other ways that Jesus served? He performed many prominent acts of service. We often call them miracles. He performed things like healing the sick, feeding the hungry, sacrificing himself on the cross. That was the ultimate act of service. However, he also served in many small ways by taking the time to acknowledge the needs of others and validate them as people, by making breakfast for the disciples. It's in John 21. Although I guess maybe food when you're really hungry is a bit of a miracle. He brought back Lazarus from the dead. So that was a big thing, a miracle, but he also mourned with Mary and Martha over his death. That was a small thing. That's something that you and I can do. He spent time with people who weren't very cool, people who actually weren't even socially acceptable to be with. And I recognize that much of what we read about Jesus are the prominent, miraculous acts of service that he performed through his divine nature, things that we are not capable of replicating ourselves. However, what we can seek to imitate is the heart behind those actions, a heart of love, compassion, and humility. And in fact, everything that we know about Jesus' life should lead us to believe that he performed countless small acts of service that we never even read about. And you can do those things. I would also add that it doesn't appear that Jesus was stressed by time or what others thought of him or a list of tasks to accomplish every day. Philippians 2, 3 through 5 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. All right, I'd like to get into some practical things now. And I want to start with some of the ways that you all have served us as a family. You welcomed us warmly when we moved here. There were a ton of groceries on our kitchen table when we got here. We've had baby meals. We've had anonymous gifts. People have taken care of our dog. You've babysat our children. You've helped with our house. You've asked about our lives. You've shown interest in our children. You kept the teacher's snack box well filled. And I could go on of the ways that you have served us as a family. And so I think the common theme in all those things is that serving is about showing that you care. It can be simple, small things. And in fact, that's really usually what it is. It's those simple, small things. Small acts of kindness, kind words, a hug, a text, maybe WhatsApp, listening. I'm going to quote from the book, A Cup of Cold Water. Jesus did not use an elaborate, time-consuming way as an example of how to serve, but rather the offer of a cup of cold water. The most precious and meaningful gifts are not even tangible. A smile, a prayer, a hug, spoken encouragement. You cannot buy these at the store, or even order them online to quickly wrap in a bow or tuck in a gift bag. And I think that mindset is important in the fast-paced life, that world and life that we live today. That quote also mentioned prayer in it, and I think prayer is an important way that we serve others as well. I think it's actually quite a revealing method of service, revealing of our heart. Prayer is an action that you are taking to serve someone else that also reflects a key heart posture. I think it is possible to serve someone in some physical way for selfish reasons, but I think it's a lot harder to pray for someone personally on your own with nobody watching, nobody knowing, for selfish reasons. I think that actually comes out of love for that person. There's not any other reason to do that. I think using your spiritual gifts to the best of your ability is a great way to serve the church, to serve others in the church. Performing your church office with excellence, again, to the best of your ability. Being willing to accept church responsibilities when they're given to you. Whether that's teaching Sunday school, being a host, being a janitor, greeting people at the door as they come in, making food for fellowship meal, being on the food committee, mowing the grass, giving money to the offering, leading songs, being on the school board, maybe even giving a topic. Doing those things willingly and with excellence shows a respect and love for the people around us. And that is service. When Lloyd's house fire happened, there was an incredible amount of serving that happened, as people jumped in to help with the many things that needed to be done. However, maybe just as important as doing those physical things, the cleaning the dishes and the demolition and all those things, was the presence and prayers and care of other people. Letting them know in a difficult time that they weren't alone and that people cared about them and had empathy for their loss. We also serve on a broader scale. Our young people go into service. Kendalls are serving in Ireland. We help other churches with financial needs sometimes. I think Trauger Church was started with financial help from other churches. And I could list many more specific ways that we can serve others. But I think the key is the attitude and the heart posture that we have toward others. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record at this point, I think all of these things play a role in enabling us to better serve in God's kingdom. Now, how do we find opportunities to serve other people? How do we know when we're being called to serve someone else? I took the liberty of taking some insights from our small group a month or two ago on this. And so I might quote a few of them here. I think they gave me their permission on this. One thing that Steve said is that when I see something that needs to be done, that is a calling. In other words, the recognition of a need can be a sign. However, what does it take to recognize needs? What does that actually mean? How do we do that? I believe having a good relationship with God is key. Service should be Spirit-led and come out of a heart of love. Having a good relationship with others. Relationships and time spent with others open opportunities and reveal needs. We can also find inspiration from others and the ways that they serve. So I'd like you to take a moment here and think about how someone in this church has served you in a way that meant something to you. Okay, now I'd like you to turn and tell someone beside you what that was. If you're not comfortable sharing that, come up with something else quick. Go ahead. All right, so that delightful little whisper hum of sound was a sound of maybe 50 different acts of service being described. That in itself is amazing, but also sometimes by hearing the acts of service that other people can testify about or give testimonies about ways that they've been served, we can find ideas of ways that we can serve and say, you know what, that was an amazing way that somebody served me or that somebody served somebody else. I'd like to do that sometime. I'd like to help somebody else in that same way. Now, there can be some pitfalls as we serve others. We can focus inwardly too much rather than focusing outwardly. Whenever we talk about practical examples of serving each other, remember that the purpose is not just to make everyone here at Trauger Mennonite Church comfortable and happy. It is about supporting each other to enable us to better serve in doing the work of the Catholic Church. And I mean that Catholic with the small c, the universal church. I think that's what I keep trying to get at here with these different levels. Another pitfall is that serving can be just for appearance or personal gain. And I asked our small group, is there any good that can come from that? From just serving for appearance, or just maybe because it's the right thing, but I don't want to do it. And we decided that God can use things for his glory, regardless of the intention of the doer. And that serving is still a good practice that maybe can build a good habit of serving that eventually can lead to a better heart posture. But still think and believe that serving with love is far more powerful. Our question should be, what can I do to serve the church, not what can the church do for me? And the last pitfall is that we can give us a false sense of spiritual security. We can feel like I checked off my act of service for the day. Now I'm good. Now I'm a good person. I'm supporting the church. I'm supporting my fellow believers. So looking for opportunities is on one side of the spectrum. Having too many opportunities to serve is maybe on the other side. And I think that's where people can sometimes experience burnout. So how do we know when we are experiencing burnout? I think it's tricky because sometimes our human nature may jump in, and on a given day we may feel like, you know what, I feel kind of selfish and lazy and jealous or whatever it may be, and I don't want to help anybody today. I've been helping a lot. I don't think that's burnout. That's just our human nature coming out. But I think it is possible to give too much of ourselves and end up losing the desire or even the ability to serve others as we should or as we could. So what can we do to prevent this from happening? I think we need to have a proper focus on the importance of service and how it fits into God's kingdom. Again, these levels that I'm talking about. How is serving the person beside me enabling God's broader kingdom to work in the world? I think when we understand that and see that, it makes that serving more sustainable. I think a good balance of external and internal service. And what I mean by that is serving people right here in our church and serving people outside of our church. And an example that Donna gave, if I can use this, is that she feels like working at the pregnancy center helped enhance her church relationships. And I don't want to speak too much for her here, but I think it helped provide an outside perspective and outside relationships that then, I don't know, maybe I should have you say what exactly it did for you, but it helped shape her picture of God's kingdom and gave her maybe renewed energy for relationships here in Trauger Mennonite Church. True sustainable service needs to fit into God's bigger picture. I also think it's important to recognize the stage of life that we are in and what we're capable of at this moment, and then accept and embrace that. It's not an excuse to be lazy, but for us, we have a little baby, we have a toddler, we just bought a house. Life is kind of crazy for us right now, and we don't feel like we have lots and lots of space to be going out and doing lots of other things for other people. We are the ones being served right now by you all. And we need to be okay with accepting that and recognize that there will be times in the future when we can serve others in the same way that we are being served now. And finally, rejuvenation. And I think rejuvenation comes from allowing others to serve us, which takes humility. I think we're kind of finding that out as a family. It can feel like if you're always receiving and you feel like maybe you're not giving as much, or at least not in the same ways, that can be hard sometimes. But we're called to accept that with humility. Taking time to meditate, to rest, to recharge. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness doing this. I think if Jesus needed that, we probably need that too sometimes. And maintaining a good relationship with God. Being filled by Him so that we have something inside of us to give to others. So, to finish up here, we must be willing to be served, and sometimes pride can get in the way of allowing others to serve us, and we must also be willing to serve others. Veronica Sexton says in an article that, "We make all sorts of rational explanations for not serving. I don't have time. I don't know what I would do. I don't have any special skills to contribute. They don't need me." But the reality is the Lord doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. God used men and women with similar doubts to change the course of history. Moses didn't think he was a leader or speaker, but God worked through Moses to bring Israel out of slavery. David was the youngest, and therefore the most insignificant at that time of all his brothers. But God worked through David to defeat a giant and eventually made him a king. Paul used to kill Christians before he met Jesus, but he went on to become one of the most highly regarded and prolific writers and church planters in history. God doesn't want to work through you, He wants to work in you. So, build relationships with others. Allow the Spirit to lead you to opportunities for service. Give and receive acts of service with a loving and humble heart. Keep the bigger picture in mind as you serve each other here in Trauger and support the work of Christians elsewhere. And most importantly, let's remember to follow Jesus' example as we seek to fulfill the work of the church that God has put before us.